My Fluval Evo 13.5 is a couple of weeks short of its first anniversary, and the 1 year mark feels like a pretty good time for an update. So today I'll tell you how it's been getting on, the problems I've had, and I'll show you how I run the system. Now, I last updated you 6 months ago when the tank was looking a bit of a mess. My nitrate had more or less bottomed out to 0 and my phosphate was over 0.9 parts per million. But because it's such a small tank, fixing the problem was pretty easy and only took a few large water changes over the course of a few weeks. And now I'm keeping on top of maintenance like changing the filter sponge and doing regular weekly water changes. All of the cyanobacteria and most of the algae is now completely gone, and my water parameters are much better, with my nitrate around 5 parts per million and my phosphate at around 0.2 parts per million. Now, to get my levels under control, I did consider fitting a refugium to this tank, but I decided against that because it turns out these little cut up bits of filter sponge combined with weekly water changes are all this tank needs for filtration. And this is the first tank I've had that looks instantly better after a water change, even only 20%. And if the tank gets really out of shape, it is dead easy to do a 50% plus water change, which makes a huge difference and completely resets the tank. It's also helped adding a second power head, which came as a bit of a surprise to many people in the comment section who've asked if the tank is now just a complete dust bowl. Well, I have an AI Nero 3 that runs at 40% and a Jekod SLW10 that runs at 100%. I actually didn't think my corals were getting enough flow when I had just the Nero, and now everything is moving nicely in the current, especially at the far end of the tank. And as well as making my corals look more healthy, having 2 power heads has made a huge difference to the sand bed. The Tritus used to settle there, but now it can't because the flow is too strong, so it ends up in my filter sponge, which I just throw away and replace once or twice a week. I got the Jekod instead of a second Nero 3 because the Nero makes a bit of noise above 50% intensity, and I'm very sensitive to noise on this tank because it's in my home office / YouTube studio. I also prefer the feed mode on the Jekod because it turns the pump off completely, whereas the Nero only goes down to 10%, so it slurps every time I do a water change and expose it to air. I also replaced the return pump after the TMC one I had developed a fault, and I now have a Jekod DC650 which fits nicely, and although it did rattle for a few days at first, it is now completely silent, and that is the return pump I would recommend for this tank or any tank of a similar size. In terms of dosing, I just dose calcwater to replace the calcium and alkalinity my corals consume, and that's working really well on this tank. While the corals aren't exactly growing out of control, they are starting to spread nicely, particularly considering I completely neglected this tank until as recently as 6 months ago. I only have 10 corals in this tank so far, but it's almost fully stocked already, and I think I'll only add 3 or 4 more corals before it's done. Now, I usually overcrowd my tanks, and I have to say that I think this tank is looking much better with the corals spaced out, and I think that will really show in 6 months' time when they've covered the rockwork and all you can see is coral. I added 2 rock flower anemones recently, although one disappeared around the back instantly, so I can only show you this one. I plan on adding an anemone crab or an anemone shrimp to live in the rock flower anemone, but my clowns currently can't be trusted as they are quite territorial, as you can see from the fact that they bite my hand every time they see it. And there was me thinking Nemo was supposed to be cute. I have tried 2 shrimp gobies in this tank, but they've both disappeared, and while I don't know why for sure, I do wonder if they were getting bullied by the clowns given it's such a small tank. And I actually might move my clowns on to see if I can restore calm to the reef. If I do that, I'll probably get a firefish, a shrimp goby, and maybe a small blenny, but let me know down in the comment section below which fish you choose for this tank. And of course, a reef dork update wouldn't be the same if it didn't include a change of lights. I originally ran an AI Prime HD on this tank, which was totally fine, but the fan used to come on from time to time, which I found slightly annoying in my quiet room, and I think the AI blade is the perfect fit for this tank. It's much cheaper than the Prime and is the same rectangular shape as the tank, which means it spreads light much more evenly throughout the length of the tank. And the side to side spread is also very impressive, and the blade lights up parts of my rockwork that were previously shaded, which means my corals now have more space to grow. And the blade could probably even fit under the lid the Fluval comes with, which I removed on day 1. And finally, I'll tell you what's in each of the filter chambers. The first chamber has that disposable sponge I mentioned that sits on top of a bracket I 3D printed, which also holds a bag of activated carbon that I change maybe every couple of months. And there's also a small piece of live rock sitting at the bottom, as well as the temperature probe for my heating controller. In the second chamber I have a 100-watt heater and the bag of filter media that came with the tank. And in the final chamber is my return pump of course, plus the sensor outlet for my auto top off, the Tunzi Osmolator Nano. Now because I have this tank dialed in, I'm not planning on any major changes to it, and instead I'll just keep doing 20% weekly water changes, test the parameters as often as I can, and maybe buy a few more corals. But I'm enjoying how low maintenance this tank is and how easy it is to look after as a result. So my intention is to let this grow out and become a packed reef tank with all of the rockwork covered in corals. If you've got any questions then let me know in the comments section below, and if you enjoyed the video give me a thumbs up and subscribe for next time, and until then, happy reefing.